In this video, I'm going to show you how to enlarge a photo with a grid. The first thing I want to do is draw the grid. Now, my paper is 14 inches by 17 inches, and the total size of the drawing that I'm going to be working on is going to be 12 inches by 16 inches. So the first thing that I've done is I've measured in on the 14-inch side 1 inch. And I always make sure that I make 2 marks so that when I draw the line with the ruler, the border is going to be parallel with the outer edge of the paper. Now, because the height of my drawing is going to be 16 inches, I measured down half an inch since the paper's 17 inches. So I've got to measure down ½ inch on the top and then measure up ½ inch on the bottom. And that's what I'm working on right now. So placing 2 marks, then holding my ruler steady. You know, whenever you hold your ruler, you've got to be really careful to hold it kind of right in the center with your non-dominant hand. And I'll show you how to do this again coming up. Right now, I'm measuring, right now I'm going to measure 4-inch squares. So I'm putting marks at the 4-inch and the 8-inch points. I'm doing that twice so that when I draw my lines, I can make sure that they're parallel. So here I am lining up the ruler, making sure that those little marks just show, and I'm holding it right in the middle with my non-dominant hand. And I'm doing the same thing for the other side. Lining the ruler up, making sure my little marks show just slightly over the edge. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure measure down 4 inches, 8 inches, and then you guessed it, 12 inches. Now, as I'm doing that, what I discovered was my paper wasn't exactly 17 inches, so it's a little bit short of 16 inches. But since I'm going to be focused on a drawing of negative spaces between leaves and branches, it's going to be okay that it's not quite precise. So here I am holding the ruler, non-dominant hand, holding it steady about in the center, and then just pulling my line lightly. You always want to make sure that you draw your grid with a light hand and don't press down too hard. Another really good idea when you're doing this sketch and also when you're doing your grid is to use a softer pencil. Now the real reason that I recommend a softer pencil is so it won't make any indentations into the paper. If you use a pencil that's too hard, and if you press down too hard, then what's going to happen is you're going to make these like marks in the paper, and then when you paint over them, sometimes they'll come up as like little white lines. So for this, I'm using an ebony pencil. Now the other reason I'm using an ebony pencil is so that it shows up on the video. If I used a lighter pencil, not only would it be too hard and it might make indentations on my paper, but also it wouldn't show up very well for the video. Okay, now let's talk about how to enlarge with a grid. It's really all about, what I do is I plot out where my lines are in relationship to each square. And in this particular design, which focuses on negative spaces between the leaves and negative spaces between branches, I'm really only drawing the shapes of the negative spaces. I'm not going to get in there and draw the shapes of the leaves. There's no need to. Now, as I'm looking at those two shapes, I'm looking at the distance between it. Drawing is all about relationships. Now right here, I'm deciding where to come in on the side. And I see that that angle comes in about the halfway point between those squares there, and I always plot them out. Now I'll continue to explain that as we go along. Right now I'm looking at that curved shape, and I'm working on getting that curve. And you'll notice me looking off to the right side. You might be wondering what I'm looking at. I'm looking at my computer screen. So I have this image pulled up really large on my computer screen. I don't recommend drawing these from images on your phone. Your phone images are just going to be a little bit too small. So again, I'm looking at that curve. Now, when I start plotting out my lines and figuring out where they are, I always ask myself, is it halfway up between the lines of the squares, between the corners, or is it maybe 1/3 of the way? So I ask myself that, and as I draw lines and draw the angles that I see of the negative spaces, I always ask myself, is it horizontal, is it vertical, or does it slant, a little bit differently? So I look at angles, and I look at their relationship to each other. I plot the lines out on each of the squares. And here I am trying to figure out, I got a little lost right there, I remember that. I was trying to figure out what was light and what was dark. And I got so confused by those images there, I decided I was going to put little X's on the negative space. And that's a good little trick, because if you find out as you're working, you're like a little confused, like what's the positive shapes? What are the leaves? What are the branches? What is the space? Just put little X's on your negative space. You're going to be painting your negative space black anyway. So put some X's on it. So now I've got that shape in there figured out. And just adjusted it a little bit. I like to use a kneaded eraser. Now, down here I took what we call artistic license. Now, I know that I've got some leaves that are in shadow in front of another leaf that's really bright, but I like that shape, and so I decided I would make that a negative space. So I did that on purpose. Like, I knew it wasn't sky, but I decided to put it there anyway because I thought that shape would look good. So I put a little X there. So there's a very skinny shape of space there. Okay, right now I'm looking at that little tiny corner of the leaf. Now compare what I'm drawing to the photo. And I see that little tiny corner of the leaf starts there. Now I move down to the bottom, and I'm working on that leaf and how that kind of curls around and has sort of a ruffly edge. It goes right into that skinny negative space that I just drew. Then I see that next line comes up like a vertical. You see how that line's pretty much a vertical? Now I'm looking at the angles, and I'm looking where that line's going to come of that edge of that space in relation to where it crosses on the grid. And you can see I copied that angle right in there. Okay, so I have a little tiny small space of negative space to the right of that line of the grid. Now I'm going to start working on that branch. So I can see that the branch goes up on that square, maybe, a quarter of the way. Now I see the other branch, and that crosses that square almost right in the middle. Okay? So it's almost right in the middle. Now I'm plotting out where that branch crosses the next grid. And I would say it comes up maybe about 1/4 to 1/3 of the way. So that's what I'm working on there, plotting that out. Now I see another branch, and that's very, very close to that, the intersection of the two lines. So I plotted that out, and now I'm just making my way back to the rest of that branch. I saw it had like kind of a slight curve. It looks like I emphasized that curve a little bit. And just making the width of the branch right there. So I'm pulling that branch down into that bottom center square. looking at that negative space there. Okay, so now I see that angle, and I see that curve of the leaf as it curves around and up, and then that will connect with that other stem there coming off of the branch. Okay, so I got that angle down. So I'm really focusing on the negative spaces. I'm focusing on trying to get the angles I see and the curves I see exactly as I see them. And I'm plotting everything out in relationship to the grid. All right, so now I'm working on that negative space all the way over on the left side. I see how that curves around a little bit. And then the middle of that opening of the leaf comes up to about the middle of that square there on the left. And then I've got that kind of parabola, really cool shape right in there, how that curves around. And by the way, this is a fig tree, and these are the shape of fig leaves, and I think the shape's really intriguing. Okay, so that leaf starts, I would say it's a little bit above the center. Then I'm looking at that angle as that edge of that leaf comes up. So then I switched and I'm working on the other leaf, and I'm going to plot that out so I can draw those two leaves in relationship to each other, and so I can figure out where that negative space is going to go. All right, so I see a little tiny bit of space right there between that intersection. And here I'm working on the edge of that leaf as it comes down. There I'm actually doing a little sighting, so I'm holding my pencil up to an angle that I see on my computer screen that's to the right of me right there. So here I'm placing that other leaf as it kind of edges on the screen, and now I'm working on that little, it looks like almost a mitten kind of shape coming up there. And I worked on that negative space as it comes down, that opening there between the two parts of the leaf. And it looks like I could have drawn that a little bit longer as I'm looking at it. I'll probably go back and fix that before I start my painting. And now I'm really putting that other leaf that's right in the middle on, and I'm looking where that angle is, and see that little triangle of negative space in that square? Yeah, that's what I was looking at right there. Then I noticed that whole bottom edge of that leaf on the left is kind of coming down straight. Now I think I'm skipping around again. Yeah, I'm going to go back to that stem, that's coming off that leaf to get that swinging around, and then I started getting involved with the smaller leaf that's in the distance, and yeah, that gives me that beautiful sense of scale. So having that little small leaf in the distance, that really helps to create depth in this drawing I'm doing right now. So I'm working on those smaller little shapes of that leaf back there. Okay, now I think I'm going to come back to the big leaf. Yeah, all right, coming back to the big leaf, working on that curve, and I'm seeing how that one edge of the leaf is almost like a straight line up in there. So it's almost a straight line, and there I'm adjusting that curve, and I wanted to push that curve a little bit over to the left. And here I'm getting, there I go, finally, getting that stem. Not that I would paint the stem, but I just wanted to have like a sense of where it is. Then I noticed that leaf had this beautiful, very sensitive little ruffly kind of shape to it. So I was like totally into drawing that. All right, now I am back to the small leaf. And I'm looking at that negative space right in there. And some of the negative spaces, they start to remind me of funny little animals, or sometimes hands. So I like to make those associations as I work, use my imagination. It's kind of fun. So yeah, still working on that smaller leaf there in the distance, and looking at the negative space that it forms there with that branch. Finishing off that bottom negative space with that angle of the leaf. Now in the bottom of that square, I see some more space from the sky right in there. So I got that shape on. And here I realized that I didn't finish off this space, so I'm getting that angle that I see, and then pulling this towards there, pulling that all together. And here I'm going to finish off that space in the bottom center square. I'm looking at very carefully at that angle, and then I see that leaf on the bottom has that kind of ruffly shape curving around. Now I can always go back and perfect the drawing. I can perfect some of the areas, where I mentioned before I saw a little bit more of a negative space. I know I want to come back there and fix that. But the main thing is to get it onto the paper and to get your drawing so it's pretty accurate, but really realizing you can always go back and shift things around a little bit, change things if you, and it's always good to step back, analyze your drawing, and do some fine tuning. That's what we call it. We call it fine tuning in art. All right, now as I was working on this negative space right there, and that small curve of that leaf in the distance that I'm about to put on there, I saw how those leaves are like almost touching. And then I started like laughing to myself because it kind of reminded me of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, and where God's creating Adam and the two are like reaching out their fingers to touch each other, and they have that little tiny space between it. So those funny little amusing things, they happen when you're drawing, and I just kind of chuckle at myself at some of the funny associations I come up with. But often when I'm working on natural forms, that'll happen to me, and like I said, a lot of times I'll see little animals or like different types of organic forms. It's kind of fun. So I've got those shapes there. And, I'm looking at that bottom shape of the leaf. I'm thinking, oh, that could have been a little bit wider. I may go back and fix that as well. So I'm looking at two places that I may go back and work on. Okay, so I'm up here, and I'm looking at this negative space as it comes down, and the width of that leaf there, and I see that, that comes over, that started about halfway down on that square, and then that's the negative space that I see right in there, curving around, and that heads up, and now I'm back here because I realized I didn't finish that. Now you can see I jump around a little bit as I draw. I don't always stay in one place. I skipped a little bit of that part just to shorten up this video as I'm finishing it up. Now as I get to the top, this area up here gets a little bit more complex. So you can see as I'm working on the leaves, working on the shapes between the leaves, and just getting that finished up in there. And then finally, I will go over to the left side and work on the negative spaces there. So at the end of this video, what I'll be doing before I start painting is erasing my grid lines, and then, like I said, going back in and making some of those small corrections that I noticed as I was kind of rewatching this. Now what I suggest that you do is, after you're finished your drawing, take a step back, prop your drawing up, or maybe tape it on the wall so you can compare your drawing to the image that you're looking at on your computer screen. And then have a good hard look at it, and if you notice that any shapes are a little bit different, go back and fix them.